Would you like to come out and see us? Come break your heart and put it back again. Or would you like to answer the questions of what we're wrong with women and men? Do you think that you could ever put it on the line? Do you think that you could even spare the time?
I'm kind of a quote guy. I like quotes. I like hearing different great quotes, but probably near the top of my list is a quote I heard probably 20 years ago, and it said, "Needed little, offered much." I thought, man, that'd be great on a tombstone. Needed little, offered much. And I have seen more transformation take place with students and with people in the world of generosity than almost any single place. Several years ago, I had a student from down in the valley of Texas, from a little town. He came up, he had never heard of our ministry, and he became a Young Life leader. And he asked me, I'm getting to know some guys from this small Texas town, and they're from lower income, and I want to do something with them to get to know them. What do I do next? And he was pretty pure-hearted and naive and just said, what do I do next with them? And I said, why don't you take all of them for a weekend to your grandmother's house up on the highest point in Austin, had this cool old house that she didn't live in anymore, and just go have a fun weekend with them. And he said, great, I'll get to know them, we'll tell stories and get to know each other and just have fun. Well, he goes and picks these 8 guys up. Driving back into town, he decides to pull into Target to get some junk food and just some fun stuff for the weekend. He pulls in and he tells them, grab a cart and go get some stuff. Well, they weren't real sure of how much they should get. Not they go out and get a few things. And he goes, no, like go out and get some more stuff. They came back with a little more, and he's like, no, go out, fill those carts up, let's go. And they come back pretty smiling, and 10,000 gummy bears and root beer and a rib stick and all these videos, and they were like pretty excited. And he was like, okay, this is great. And they go through the line, and he tells them he has the Young Life credit card, which it wasn't, it was his. And he hadn't really thought through all this. And several $100s later, they're going through this line. And it was like Christmas. The guys were loving it. And he goes and have this great weekend with them. And Monday comes along, and I ask him how to go. And he said, it was probably one of the single best weekends I've ever had in my life. We got to know each other. We got in my grandmother's giant trash cans and went down this hill about 800 miles an hour and almost killed each other with cars coming by. And we ate junk food and felt terrible all weekend. And he said we had an incredible time. And these guys did. Though if you ask them, they'll say that was the best weekend I had in high school. And they just had a great time. And it was so fun to hear him talk about his generosity. I don't think he viewed it that way. He just thought, I said, how'd you pay for it? He goes, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And the spirit of generosity and how it affected these guys. And I loved it. I've seen over the years in my small groups, when you mention this idea of generosity, like how could 12 guys, could we chip in if any of us need something? Could we pay for somebody's scholarship? I've seen guys in our groups and girls in our community buy cars for people who wanted to be a Young Life leader. I've seen scholarships. I've seen mom's rent paid or a roommate's rent paid because they were struggling. Or I've seen so many things, and introducing this idea, especially I think to people who are just exploring their faith and not sure about who God is. I think so many times we're like, well, they need to understand their sin. And of course, if you spend time with the Lord, you'll understand your selfishness in ways. But this idea that people would be exposed to the person of Christ through generosity, I like. And watching students, especially students who really didn't have a faith or new in their faith, discover the beauty and the generosity of God. After all, it's all a gift from God. He's been generous from our own breath to everything He gives us, to a chance to go to a university, to all the different things that God has blessed us with. We're products of this incredible generosity. And if we're going to introduce this person of Christ to people, we would want to do it through this idea of generosity. In Scripture, it says, the kingdom of God is near. And then it says, freely give as you've been freely given to. And this notion that, first and foremost, we've all been given to. We've all been given more than we could ever repay. And living out of that kind of life and that kind of mind. And then practicing that. And whether that be of your time, of your money, of your resources, of your gifts, whatever that is, that we learn to be generous. And I've watched this generosity really affect a whole community, a whole hundreds of students at times. And what a joy and what momentum it brings. And even within the group, that we would stop self-focus all the time when I've got 15 guys in a circle and all we're talking about is ourselves and our problems, instead of how could we care for someone else together, and how it takes us out of ourselves and begins to kind of send us out in the world. And Jesus talks about this in Matthew 20, one of my favorites. And it says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them out in the vineyard. Well, what's fascinating about this to me is, for the kingdom of heaven, that should click in all of us. Like, heaven is like what? God's kingdom is like this. When Jesus speaks to Pilate, my kingdom's not of this world. What is his kingdom like? And this is a clue to his kingdom. And it says that this landowner goes out early in the morning, and then he goes out again, and then he goes out again at noon, and he goes out again, and even at the end of the day, and he picks up workers, and he asks them, why aren't you working yet? Well, no one's come to us. And at the end of the day, he tells his foreman, let's pay each one of them. And he pays them all the same. Well, this causes a reaction, as you would imagine, for the guys who've worked hard all day and feel like they deserve more. And quickly it says this, it says, those who hired last worked for only an hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us and have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, have I not been unfair to you, friend? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. And then he says these two things, and I think they're fascinating. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? And I think this is, without getting into that too much, is very important, that God is going to be, he might be doing a special thing over here in this guy or this guy, and that might be what they really needed. We are not God. We don't see everything. And sometimes he's dealing out generosity to other people. And one of the things that I think really mark us as mature believers is that we're happy for someone else. And when you practice generosity, you begin to do that because they're going to receive something that you might not get. And so this is one of the things that plays out. But then he says this, are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be first and the first will be last. And this is where that famous verse comes from this story. And are you envious because I'm generous? What an absurd thing that we would be mad or jealous or envious for someone being generous. That can't be who we want to be. And I know I don't want to be jealous because someone is generous. That doesn't even seem to fit, right? And in God's economy, there's this beautiful picture, and he really calls them on it. You envy us because I'm generous, and really talks to the heart of who we are. To kind of go back to this story to finish, this leader asked me, how do I finish with these guys? I've been with them 3 years. And I said, well, let's do it again. And so he goes and picks them up again. He gives them cards again. They run it through Target, and it was amazing. They were having a blast. And they filled the cards up. We collected a little money so he didn't have to take as big a hit, and he lets them go through. But this time, we got them out in the parking lot. And in the parking lot, we told them that we're going to do something different this time. This time, we had called the Baptist children's home of these orphans, and we went and took all this stuff this time and we played with them with all this stuff. And to a T, if you ask those guys, was this time more fun than the other, they'd say yes. That they got to go and be generous. And I thought, this is the best picture. I don't know, this leader coming up with the original idea and us finishing it with this was one of the best pictures I've ever seen of really how the gospel should play out. It's a gospel of generosity. Christ's death on the cross for us, his great love for us, and pouring out everything he has for us. And here we are. They got to experience the generosity of God, and then they got to be generous. And I'll never forget, every time I drive by Target, it's the best day ever to look over at Target and just smile and think about what those boys even taught us. It's just such a great story. Looking back and just thinking about generosity in college, what comes to y'all's mind?
I think one thing that you've always said is that it's better to give than to receive, and I just constantly am learning, like, as soon as I turn the focus off myself and onto other people and give them something that, like, the problems that I tend to think about and focus on in my own life seem to work out, naturally when I'm considering other people first and trying to be generous to them. Mm-hmm. And it's been a trend, to see that play out.
I think I've seen that in, part of believing God's abundance. We sometimes have this scarcity mentality when he has so much. And, oh my gosh, if I give that, where is it going to be enough? And I got to get my piece of the pie first. That comes to mind a lot.
I mean, how do you practice the part where it might be considered kind of transactional and turn it into more just generous? And so, you're not kind of like holding it as like, I did this for you.
Well, I think we all know that giving, when I give and I expect no repayment, and having no agenda and offering it up freely, I think some of that really needs to be practiced as no one knows. I know I've received $300 in the mail cash before with a Galatians verse. And right when Teresa and I were young and married and on stuff, and I still don't know where that came from. And so God says, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. So there really needs to be, that's probably the greatest form of giving, right? No one knows. And so there needs to be a sense of that kind of generosity and giving. But I think also when it's given in community, it's a little more difficult to take. Well, I did that when 12 of us shared in the generosity. So I think there's a part of this fierce independence that attacks when we're a whole community is deciding to be generous towards someone that I think